I was just waiting on a contract from Penske, whether I was going to be the full-time driver or not. Rick had retired, and I was under contract, but I was expecting to get some type of new contract, or at least get told I was going to be the full-time driver, and nothing had been officially said to me. So I was going about my duties as testing in Arizona in the winter, and then it got to be about 10, 11 o'clock in the morning. We just started running. I went out and shook the car down, and these limos pulled up, and out of the limo comes Emerson and Senna. And I was like, oh, well. It was very cool, but in my mind, I was thinking, uh-oh, maybe I'm not going to get the full-time ride.
The question on December 20th, 1992, was whether Ayrton Senna, the world's most famous race car driver, would turn his back on Formula One for America and Roger Penske's IndyCar team. The Brazilian, a three-time F1 champion with the McLaren Honda program, was in the southwestern state of Arizona, just outside of Phoenix as the holidays approached. Would Senna, one of Grand Prix racing's all-time greats, actually step away from the struggling McLaren team to sample the Indy 500? Was he prepared to replace Monaco with Milwaukee or Italy for Cleveland? 25 years later, on the anniversary of an event simply known as The Test, Senna's day in the desert with his countryman Emerson Fittipaldi, Indy legend Rick Mears, and the young Canadian upstart Paul Tracy has become a fascinating footnote in his beloved career. It also remains the one and only time Senna orbited IndyCar racing, and shortly after the test, the real reason for his brief American flirtation was revealed.
As you know, I was a partner with Marlboro, and Senna and Emerson were both drivers for the Marlboro team, and I got a call, quite honestly, from John Hogan at Marlboro and asked me if I would test Senna. I think at that point of time, Senna was questioning where he was going to go as a driver. Was he going to stay with McLaren? Was he going to be competitive in the future? And obviously, because of our relationship and the close relationship with Marlboro, I said, come on, I'd love to have him in one of our cars. So we were testing at Firebird, our 1993 car, and it was an opportunity for him to come out and take a test in our 1992 car.
Obviously when we first heard about it, I thought this is great. It's great for everything. It's great for the sport in general, for IndyCar, but it was great for me. I mean, obviously, I know he's a hell of a driver. I know he's a tremendous talent, and I'd been watching him. So, but it was going to be fun to see him in person, and watch him on the track, and just see how he does things. But it was exciting. It was exciting for all of us. A lot of fun to do.
That was a big moment for IndyCar in Brazil. Emerson was always big, right? But he was not Senna. Emerson was big here. It was big in Brazil for his titles, but as far as charisma, Senna topped any single Brazilian we ever met, and I think any single Brazilian will ever be born.
I remember that day actually when Ayrton Senna was testing in Firebird. It was a big news. Ayrton Senna, for every Brazilian, basically he was inside everybody's home through the television, obviously, and every morning, because in Brazil the races, Formula One was kind of like very early, about 7, 8 o'clock in the morning. So everyone is waking up in the morning with Ayrton winning, and that kind of like, there was a theme that the TV was always putting when Ayrton wins the race, so it becoming kind of like a very tradition way. And I remember when he decided to go, and Emerson invited him to go and do the test in Firebird for Penske, everybody's like, whoa, that's a big deal. So for us, as a driver, I was already racing, and it was kind of like, oh, is he gonna leave Formula One? But he's still too young to leave Formula One. I think it's not the right time. So it was kind of like memorable what he did.
That brought a lot of credit to IndyCar back there, and that's when I was already very interested about coming here. That just sealed the deal for me.
And obviously it didn't take him long to show he's a racer, to prove he's a racer. You know, he didn't have to prove it, but you know what I mean. He just, I recall one of the things specifically right off the bat, watching him, and as he went out and he started getting up to speed. And you know, usually somebody in a new car, driver or not, you know, in a new car, something you haven't been on, when you start getting up to speed, you know, and the first time you start hustling a little bit, the car steps out, you know, you get into, a lot of times they'll get into a little tank slapper, you know, because you aren't sure how much you need to, you know, feed into it or whatever. And it'll take a couple little wiggles and then straighten out and go, and okay, now I'm starting to get a feel for it, where it goes. And I remember watching him, and as he first started getting up to speed and coming off the corner onto the front straight, you know, he leaned on the thing a little bit and it stepped out. And as a typical, it stepped out, he caught it, kept it there, and then just slowly straightened the thing out to the apex. You know, no tank slapper, no wiggle, no nothing. I thought, okay, that, you know, just as I thought, he's a racer.
Yeah, I was able to watch him, watch his lines. I mean, he had a very different driving style to Emerson and Rick, and just he carried a lot of speed into the corner, and I could see that, you know, my driving style at that time was to brake, basically get it to a stop, turn, go, brake, accelerate, and he carried a lot of entry rolling speed into the corner. Brake, not particularly super late, but got off the brake early and rolled lots of speed in. So, and that's in a Formula One car, because the cars are so much lighter, carry a lot of entry speed with a Formula One car. So that was much different than the IndyCar style of driving. The IndyCar style, because the cars are heavier, would stop and go, and stop and go. Whereas my driving style kind of changed a little bit from then. It was like I tried to carry more rolling speed and entry speed into the corner, and now that's how everybody drives.
He got in the car. Emerson drove probably 15 or 20 laps early one morning. It was cold, a little bit slippery, but Emerson set a time of 49.7 seconds, as I remember specifically from the detail. And he ran and set a benchmark on the car, maybe a lap time. And Senna got in very carefully. He drove slowly. The gearbox was a little bit different than he was used to. And when he didn't get the right gear, he'd stop and start again. So he ran maybe 20 laps initially, and then came in, and guess what? Said we soften up the rear springs, we make a couple of changes. So it didn't take him long to get into the game. And guess what? He was able to turn a lap time probably 3 or 4 tenths quicker than Emerson that day.
I mean, he got up to speed right away. There wasn't any problem getting up to speed. He was fast right away. He was on the pace right away, down to what me or Emerson was doing, like within 10 laps. So, I mean, I would have expected that. So, you know, it's just listening to his feedback. He just required a different approach to the car, and I actually listened very carefully and tried to adapt that to what I was doing.
And also, that was one of the things he loved about it. He got to drive again, and that was one of the things he commented on. He says, you know, in the Formula One cars, we're starting to race computers rather than drivers, you know. And he said, this is great. I get to drive again, you know. So the shifting, not a lot of the electronics. That was one of the things he really enjoyed about doing it. And so, you know, in that respect, he is going to pick it up quick, and it is going to, you know, come back to him, you know, quickly, because that's what he likes to do. And so I think that's one of the reasons he was able to do it that quickly.
I was having a hard time in Europe, and I remember him coming back from that test, and I'm chatting with him. He's like, you should investigate that. The cars are fun to drive, a lot of power, not a lot of downforce. You can power slide. So he was all excited about it. So he was like, it's like back in the Formula 4 days that you can really drive it. It's not high downforce like Formula 1. He was like a kid.
You know, the race cars are race cars, and you know, you basically get in them, you go through a corner, You listen to what the car tells you at once, and that's what you do. It's really fairly basic. It's not as much brain surgery as people think, but it's amazing how many people don't listen to the car. But he's a racer, you know. End of story. The guy was just a super talent, and it showed immediately, which I expected. That's why it didn't surprise me that much, you know. I would have been more surprised if it had struggled.
Outrunning Penske's drivers in a handful of laps was far from a surprise. The real shock Senna wanted to deliver was across the Atlantic to his McLaren boss, Ron Dennis. Applying pressure to his Formula One team by feigning interest in IndyCar served two purposes. Kept Dennis on the hunt for an engine partner to replace the outgoing Honda, and it also caused fear and panic within the F1 community to hold on to its biggest star. In the end, the test helped Senna to reportedly earn $1 million per race in 1993 with McLaren.
Well, listen, you'd be foolish not to put him in your book right away. If Senna was available, we'd have probably tried to figure something out. But obviously, I was overbooked with drivers. That seems to be one of my problems today. Too many drivers and not enough cars. But he definitely would have had an opportunity.
I know he did that test to put a pressure on Ron Dennis at the time. He had no intention coming here. I mean, I wish I could think that that was true, but that was more of a really good move from Emerson and Roger, strategy-wise, but also a good strategy for Senna to put a lot of pressure on Ron to sign him up again.
We never had any serious negotiations. Obviously, we committed to him that we didn't have a ride for him, and I think he was using us maybe as a little bit of somewhat of an impact against the McLaren guys at that point to try to get his deal put together, which we certainly understood. But again, this was a friend of Emerson's. Emerson was a key part of our team. Marlboro was a super sponsor, so anything we could do to make our partnership better, it was a pleasure for us to do business with Senna that day.
Just from his comments and stuff, I felt like, you know, he's got a little bit of thought about it. Think, you know, that down the road possibly, you know, it really kind of had a little impression that, and the fact that he enjoyed driving it so much. You know, he enjoyed the way the car drove, and the fact that he had to drive it, he got to drive it. You could tell if down the road, depending on what took place and whatever worked out or whatever, that it would be a consideration, I think.
That test showed everything, you know, like when they finally thought they had a threat to lose Senna in Formula One, I even think the FIA, Bernie at the time, they're like, I don't think we can afford that right now. And they put a stop on it. I don't know how, I don't know who paid him. They say it was McLaren, but I don't know. It could come from different sorts, but that was probably the best move he made in his career, apart from his 3 championships.
It was a big deal right from the very beginning. I mean, Senna was already well established in Formula One, obviously, won championships, won everything there was to win. Clearly, even then, he was one of the great drivers in the world. And I'd known Senna since he started Formula Ford. I think I saw his second ever Formula Ford race at Brands Hatch, and you know, so he and I went back a long way. I covered him through Formula Ford, for F2000, Formula 3. Lost track with him in Formula One, obviously, although we still had a relationship. And when he did the test, there was a lot of interest at the time, particularly from European journalists. And there was even though there wasn't anybody, I think, at the test, or very few journalists at the test, if any, there was a teleconference afterwards. And I remember it being a particularly busy press conference, and most of the questions came from Europe. But there was certainly interest from the United States as well, because the racing community pays attention to racing around the world, and including Formula One. But it was really interesting to hear the interest level from the journalists that were involved in that test back then. What was kind of fun, you had to register for the teleconference, say who you were with. And Ayrton obviously saw all the names and that were on the list of people who were on the call. And when I signed in, he sent a note through the moderator to say, Ayrton would like you to hang around after, he'd like to have a chat with you after. I thought, how cool is that? I mean, it had been several years since I'd seen him. So after the teleconference was over, I had a really nice little chat with him, and he wanted to know how I was getting on, wanted to know a little bit more about the IndyCar Championship as it was then. It was really fun, and it just showed how thoughtful the guy was. I mean, there was always something that he wanted to learn, And he kind of picked my brains for a few minutes, and it was really fun to do that. Certainly no great literary talent there. I'm not going to win a Pulitzer Prize over that, but it was certainly fun, having that one-on-one conversation with him afterwards, and knowing that he wanted to speak to me. I think it says volumes about the person himself.
Senna would go on to leave fans breathless as he somehow captured 5 wins in 1993, all while using an underpowered Ford Cosworth engine in his McLaren. His life story would come to an end the following year in San Marino, leaving questions of whether he'd return to IndyCar, possibly with Penske, as the sun set on his F1 career. Mastering a car on the Little Firebird road course was easy, but among the curiosities that linger, we're left to ponder how Senna would fare in the American discipline of oval racing. 500 miles at Indy, cornering speeds above 230 miles per hour, and hundreds of thousands of adoring fans. Such a perfect stage for the ultimate performer.
It was interesting, at the test, we said, would you like to go over and try the oval? He said, no, I've got exactly what I want here now. I've been able to drive on a road course. And guess what? Mansell, in his first race on an oval at Phoenix, crashed. So this guy was a pretty good thinker when you think about it.
He would have had no problem with it. And again, that's, like I said, a racer. What I feel is a true racer will be able to drive anything, that he does. Just give him enough laps. And with ovals, and especially large ovals, it's just seat time. There's no substitute for it. And I remember when Emerson came over, and when he first started, and I think he was driving for Patrick at the time, and I remember after one of his first oval runs on the track, they were interviewing him, and I was watching the interview, and he says, "Yeah," he says, "I've got a lot to learn." And as soon as he said that, same thing. He's a racer. He's got it. And it's not that difficult, especially if you've got a good car, to run reasonably quick on an oval. It's getting the last 1 or 2 or 3% that becomes difficult, the really hard part. And then on your speedways, that last 1 or 2 or 3%, if you get it wrong, is big. And that's what makes it hard to get. And when I heard Emerson say that, I thought, yeah, he's a racer also, He knew there's a lot more going on out there than most people realize for an oval. So I knew he would do well, with seat time. And he would have been the same way. Senna would have been the same way. He'd have picked it up very quick, and still it would have taken some laps to get the confidence, to get you've got to hone your feel down to a narrower band on a speedway. On road courses, you can wait till a car does something and then react to it and catch it. Speedways, you got to learn to work off the feel of what takes place before it happens, so you can already be catching it when it starts. And that's the part that takes the seat time. And that's all he would have had to do. I mean, he knew how to get around the track. He knew what kind of lines to take, and and he would have had no trouble with it at all. Just with enough seat time on the speedways mainly. And I think he really would have enjoyed it.
To commemorate the 25th anniversary of the test, Roger Penske commissioned a complete restoration of Penske PC21 chassis number 004 and fitted it with a fresh Ilmor-built 2.65-liter turbocharged Chevy V8 engine, using the same exact chassis setup sheet from December 20th, 1992. The stunning car, in its period-correct Marlboro livery, was unveiled for the Senna Institute, the foundation created by the Brazilian, in the summer of 2017.
Well, that says a lot about Roger, how influenced that test was just for Roger, for him to restore the car back to that original spec, and having that setup, that configuration on hand to do that and to commemorate that, obviously shows Roger's how fond of Senna's career he was as well.
Well, when you think about Jackie Stewart and Graham Hill and Montoya and some of the great Formula One drivers that have come here, Mansell, and come to the United States to race at Indianapolis and to drive an IndyCar, and to think that Senna never made it to the track but had a chance to drive one of our cars is certainly special. It's hard to believe it's been 25 years, and the fact that we have the car, it's a running car, it's a car that Emerson won 4 races with. Mears drove the car, so it's got some special talent and been in the seat of that car. It's a special place for me from the standpoint of a key historic car.
That shows how big that guy was and how important IndyCar is as well, because you have a guy that had everything in Formula One, had no desire to leave, had no need to come do a test, but he was a true racer, and he came here, did that. It's almost like it's a script, right? Because we can people now got to know Senna after the movie here in America. You know, he's became more popular if he was not a true die-hard Formula One fan. But he also contributed to IndyCar in a way that we could never imagine.
Yeah, to have Roger be able to, you know, restore the car that Ayrton Senna tested in Phoenix, in Firebird, it just shows that Roger also remember, you know, not only what an incredible moment it was, but how important it is, you know, as a champion, as a race car, as a race team owner. He didn't understand, and Roger, that's the most amazing thing. So he doesn't care about the cost. He just wants to keep those cars impeccable, and that's just show who is Roger is. He loves racing, he's passionate about racing, and the most important is he really cared about history. And I think we are fortunate to have someone like Roger to be able to restore a car that 25 years ago just did a test, and now we're going to be able to see it again. So it's really as I always say, Roger's an incredible human being.
The final question left to answer is who will perform the test driving duties to ensure Penske PC21 chassis 004 and its Chevy engine performs as flawlessly as it did 3 decades ago in Arizona.
I don't know if I'd fit in that car anymore. I'd be a bit of a stretch to be able to get in.
If Roger tell me, hey, we need someone to drive the car, I would love to be the one to be part of this celebration. It would be a dream come true to be part of this, because not only is it a special moment, but it's my hero too back then. So now that you said, I'm going to actually ask him that if he does have a driver. So if he does not, I'll be the first one to be there.
Well, the fact that we were contacted by the Senna Institute and have a chance to display this car, let them take a good look at it from nose to tail is special. And to me, it just shows the community that we're in. We give back to people, but also in the racing community, we're a tight group. And if I could be part of helping people understand who Senna was, I understand that the foundation helps young people in Brazil, which is a terrific pouring out of help and sympathy to many young people in that country. So I'm glad to be part of it, maybe playing a part of this because of his racing history with our team.
All of that kind of thing is important. It's important to the team. It's important to Roger. It's important to the series. It's important to everybody, you know, fans alike. And you know, Senna just being Senna, you know, and who he is, made it important, you know, very much so. And then obviously being, you know, with Team Penske and with Roger, you know, that again, you know, made it important. So you put the two together, and you know, it's not a bad thing. He understood Penske's, you know, presence of who he was doing this with, you know, as well as with Emerson and everything else. So just all of that combined is part of what makes it such a historic thing, and it will continue to be that way.
As a kid, I was actually using him. Okay, what does he do? So that I can become like him. So whatever it is for training, whatever it is for, I remember if he's in some way in a picture doing kind of like this, I'm trying to do the same way. So you know, you're a kid, you're just trying to becoming that hero. So Ayrton was a mirror that I think I speak for myself, but I do believe a lot of young kids, a lot of young drivers probably were thinking the same way.
It's so cool to think that he's remembered the way he is, because I mean, clearly he was a fantastic driver, no question about that. One of the best the world has ever seen. I mean, there's no question about that. Where you want to rank him, that's a different subject altogether. But you know, as a human being, he was pretty special. He was totally focused. You know, he gave up whatever it took to be at the top in motor racing. You know, he was focused on what was best for him, and ultimately he was focused on what was best for a lot of other people as well. You look back at what the Senna Institute has done, it's helped millions of youngsters in Brazil, and just the fact that, you know, he dedicated his life to that while he was a racing driver. Of course, he didn't have the opportunity to retire and focus on it afterwards, but his legacy has been continued. So, you know, he's not just a great in the motor racing world, he's a great in the humanitarian world as well, with the legacy he's continued. So I'm not surprised that anything of his life should be celebrated, and I'm going to celebrate it as well myself for sure.
Even that Ayrton didn't pursue the IndyCar series, kept going, but he did have a little bit of a taste, and I'm sure he would be also very successful like all the others. And for us, it's an honor to carry the Brazilian flag, our country, the tradition of the IndyCar series. As you have so many, you have, as you mentioned, Emerson, Piquet came, unfortunately, wasn't like, he had a big accident in Indianapolis, but Raul Boesel, Pupo Moreno, Roberto, Andre Ribeiro, Tony, myself, obviously, and many, many others. I mean, unfortunately, there is a lot, but Gil de Ferran, which is also another one. So it was great to see that trend, and I don't think it's going to stop. I think a lot of new, young generation is going to come up and keep going.
He was a student of the game. He came with Emerson in a rental car, not a big entourage, and he left the same way. In fact, that night, he was gracious enough to have dinner with Mears, with Fittipaldi and Paul Tracy, and part of our team. So he was a terrific individual, and obviously his career was amazing, as he was one of the great drivers of all times, and I was thrilled to have him drive our car. And hopefully, as people think about him in the past and know that he did come and drove a Penske car,